I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. I want to thank you all for joining this month's 30-minute skills class on how to protect yourself as a woman journalist or how to support the women journalists in your respective newsrooms. For those unfamiliar with our program, these 30-minute skills classes are intended to give all of you short, practical lessons that can be used immediately in your work. You can find recordings of all previous classes, including those on data cleaning and how to respond to a newsroom subpoena at nefac.org. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so without further delay, here's your instructor, Karen Nazish, founding director of the Coalition for Women in Journalism. Karen?
Thank you so much, Justin, and thank you for doing this really amazing program. And I think that these 30-minute workshops are a really important way for journalists to have tools available online. Thank you for having me. Today, we will go over some of the things that we have learned about women journalist safety. I'll tell you a little bit about what we do and who we are quickly, not to take too much of that time. We are a support organization called the Coalition for Women in Journalism, and we're based out of New York, but we work around the world and have different chapters in different countries, including networks of women journalists that work as support networks. So our work essentially, part of what we do is also document harassment, any kind of violations that women journalists face around the world. We cover this from 92 countries around the world. In the last 3 years, we've covered 92 countries and have chapters in 7 countries. But today I'll focus more on the United States. And I wanted to go over some data on which kind of would sort of lay the ground and give you a little bit of an idea of what kind of difficulties women journalists are facing. Also, I want to mention that these are only the documented cases, but most of the times when violations occur, whether it is in the newsroom or in the field, those are not reported publicly. So those do not count in part of the data. And so I want to mention this data sort of gives an idea of the publicly documented cases. As you understand that a lot of times there are sensitivities in newsrooms where women journalists are facing challenges, whether it is sexual harassment cases or other kinds of newsroom abuse that takes place because of discrimination and other factors. A lot of those cases are not reported publicly because of safety, privacy, and other complications that can occur in a journalist career. Also, okay, so I'm going to go over some of the things. This year, so we are in April, and by today, which is the 28th of April, in the first 4 months of 2021, we have documented 31 cases of expulsion of women journalists, 9 cases of sexual harassment. Most of these are also legal cases that could be reported publicly. There are several other sexual harassment cases that cannot be reported publicly. There are attacks and impediments that women journalists have faced. So 8 cases of attacks and impediments women journalists have faced, either while covering protests or riots that have taken place this year alone. Organized troll campaigns, we have documented 8 of them. These organized troll campaigns are not just everyday trolls that attack women journalists. So that is happening in hundreds. Hundreds of women journalists face that on a daily basis. These attacks, the troll campaigns that we're talking about are essentially organized, where we see a massive trend of a large population, thousands of trolls attacking one journalist with some sort of political angle or narrative. So we have documented 8 of those these years, which is a huge number. 4 workplace harassments. These are mostly sexual harassments, and sometimes they are professional harassments. 3 detentions of women journalists, 2 cases of legal harassment. Legal harassment means when women journalists are legally prosecuted or slapped with charges for doing their job, which is directly related to the reporting. So in 2 of those cases this year, then actually we have documented 2 murders, and one of them was today. In fact, I have been busy all morning in Kansas City. I wonder if you are familiar with the case, but a journalist, young radio reporter, Aviva Okenson Haberman, was found dead in her apartment on this morning. So we just reported this. We are in touch with the police and trying to figure out what really happened. We have cases of one case of racist attack on journalists inside the newsroom, and threats and violations and intimidations, one of those. We have, there's a document that we have that sort of gives a detail of, details of all of these attacks that links to all the stories, details of each case that I will be able to share later on a PDF as well. But I just wanted to mention that women journalists are being increasingly violated both in the field and in the newsroom. A lot of the newsroom stories are coming forward now in the post-Me Too era, and that women journalists are able to, and racism, obviously, racism is one of the issues that have come to light more formally. It's always existed in newsrooms, and there are various challenges that we feel newsrooms are going through as well in terms of understanding the problem and then tackling the problem. I do want to briefly just also go through some of the murders. This year has been really hard. In the first 4 months, we have already documented 7 cases of murders of women journalists, and I just wanted to take their names. So Rebecca Jeme Iliabo from Cameroon, she was murdered with an IED attack. Tin Hinan Leseb in Algeria was murdered because of her reporting. You might be familiar with the 3 Afghan journalists who were also killed in an attack by non-state actors, terrorist groups. So I wanted to take their names: Mursal Vahidi, Sadia Sadat, Shahnaz Raufi. And then in the US, we documented a case of Lynn Murray, who was covering, she was actually in the field covering a story, and during a large protest, I think it was, she was one of the 10 victims of the shooting in King's grocery store in Boulders, Colorado. This news came in very late when the victims were identified, and for days we were not, no one knew that there was a journalist who was also killed in that shooting. So let's see. So one of the things that obviously that I think that women journalists face, as we all know, is the issue of invisibility, oftentimes in newsrooms, and the lack of preparedness of the industry to work, with women journalists and to be able to see their work. So the issues that women journalists face with detention or arrests or online trolling that is increasing in the United States as well, is usually, or the lack of preparedness of newsrooms to be able to deliver safe resources for women journalists, essentially comes with that lack of understanding of how to work with women, how to see them as visible and all that. So we do a lot of the work that we do in terms of looking at how we can support women journalists is to make an effort to make their work visible. And when there's a bigger story, like for example, when COVID broke or the BLM protests, or other bigger stories that take place, we usually do in focus coverage of looking at where women journalists are working, how can you find their stories, and how can you create a support system where women journalists covering similar stories can work together. I have shared a link over here as well. So for example, when COVID broke out, one of the important things that we found was we knew a lot of women journalists in our network who were covering COVID while the lockdowns were taking place. And we wanted newsrooms to find them, especially the freelancers who were willing to work or who were there with expertise and their expertise was not utilized. So we created this map. If on this page you can find that map, and we do similar maps with other stories as well, Black Lives Matter, other Lebanon protests, and so on. And essentially this page essentially shows you where women journalists are working and where they're covering. You can find their names, you can find their contact details as well, their locations. And if you want to reach out to them, you can sort of get in touch with us and we can link you up with them. If you're a newsroom or if you're a reporter looking for another reporter, if you're looking for a support group, etc. So these are some of the things these are some of the areas that we're covering. One other thing that I think that I will go on, towards, later on in the conversation is how do you find support networks? Because support networks are very important. And in almost all of these cases, we find that having a good, solid support network, mentors, allies is very important for women journalists dealing with different kinds of issues in newsrooms or in the field. Let's talk a little bit about online safety. So, during Donald Trump's government, under his presidency, and after, it's going on right now as well, we have seen an increase of violations against women journalists, both, in physical spaces when they're covering protests, but we have definitely seen massive misinformation campaigns against women journalists online. And a lot of that sort of is something that freelancers are trying to figure out what to do about, and newsrooms are trying to figure out as well. So there are certain obvious ways that you can sort of respond to online trolling. And I'll talk a little bit about just a few things that you can keep in mind when online trolling takes place. One of the things that we have noticed in the last few years is that oftentimes when online trolling takes place, journalists have different journalists have different responses, and different kinds of advice works in different situations. So, for example, sometimes journalists, would go offline and not engage with trolls. Some journalists use that strategy, and that works for a while. A lot of times journalists have to leave, social media platforms, which is at the level of what kind of liberty a journalist should have. That is absolutely wrong, that a journalist has to leave an online platform. But in terms of securing themselves, sometimes journalists do that. And I mean, we don't recommend that strategy because that affects the journalist's ability to be visible. But that has been something that has worked a lot for journalists. And the other thing that journalists sometimes do is to respond to your trolls. That is also something that sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't work. It's all relative. Sometimes, during an online trolling, that these are unreasonable people saying unreasonable things, sometimes really problematic things, spreading misinformation about the reporting of the journalist, or, character assassinating the journalist herself. Responding to them may not work, and also leaving the social media platform, may not work as well. So there are different kinds of things that I think that we can prepare ourselves when we're going online, and we know that we might be reporting a political story and we may get the backlash. So one of the tip would be to, prepare your mind and body for the online violence that may come forward. If you are reporting on a political story, or you're saying something controversial or exposing something, you may get a massive response from trolls. And if you are prepared for that, your body and mind will be prepared for that. Of course, this has, online trolling can be, this tip is essentially also to highlight that online trolling can be very difficult on the mind. Sometimes it can activate a fear response in the brain. And to avoid that, I think that preparation and being aware that you're going into the space and sharing your information would be helpful. So be prepared before reading your responses. Be prepared what the responses could be like. Limit your exposure. Certainly, there is no need to read all of your trolls. If there are things that are said mostly useless, they're not good enough for your time. So the less time you spend thinking about, what the troll said online, you will get the more time doing your work and, just, being in your own headspace rather than the headspace of your troll. Press pause. Definitely, feeling hyper aroused and, eager to strike back instantly. That's something that happens when you read someone sharing misinformation about your work. Obviously, that can enrage you. And a lot of times you have to do that. There are certain situations where you can do that. So for example, sometimes trolls are not just, people online or bots online that are irrelevant to your work. They could be professional people. Like we have documented a lot of cases where government officials have spread misinformation about women journalists, or people from different political parties. We report these cases mostly from other countries in South Asia, Middle East, Russia, not so much in the United States, but you could have professional trolls trolling you or other colleagues. There's conservative media and Republican and liberal media. So there's that kind of trolling as well. So if someone's professionally attacking you, of course, you have to do a fact check and sort of politely step back and correct that misinformed fact. But if you understanding your troll comes with also knowing who you're responding to and whether you need to spend that time and energy to respond to them anyway. A lot of one of the things that I think that has worked with a lot of our members is to immediately report and block your abuser. If you think someone's abusing you online, you should just report them and block them. Reporting usually works more effectively if you're also having other colleagues and friends to help you report a certain troll. Seek help from your editors and colleagues as well. So if you think that there is an organized online trolling campaign against you, or more than 5 trolls are attacking you online, you must definitely seek help from your editor. Even if you're a freelancer, you should report to your editor that you've been trolled for the article, or for the work, or for your tweets, and help them report that account as well. Certainly, one thing that is recommended for all women journalists, whether you are a staff reporter or a freelancer, is to work with a support group. Support groups can be, in your newsroom. It could be unions. It could be support groups that you can form alongside with your friends, both male and female colleagues, who can become your support group. If you're looking for support groups, we have support networks in different countries, including the US and Canada. So you can feel free to, get in touch with us. Our email is press@womeninjournalism.org. You can find it on our website. We'll be happy to add you to the support group as well. These support groups, essentially the ones that we have, are essentially groups of women journalists and editors. And if something happens or you're looking for resources, any kind of resources, the support group does everything. So if you're looking for resources, contacts, advice, and so on, these are groups of women journalists and editors who, sort of like chip in and try to help you out. Certainly, in terms of just an extension to a support group is also to find allies and mentors. Reach out to mentors who can be there for you when you're covering something difficult or something political and something important. And your mentors are there to help you. It is very important that when women journalists face online attacks, that they have someone to talk to, because one of the unavoidable effects of online attacks is the mental toll that it takes to know that someone's saying something really nasty about you online. So to have someone to go to and be in touch with consistently, that's what mentors do. That is something that can be very helpful. We also have an app called JSafe. So we're kind of in a beta version, but you can still find it on your iTunes and Android. It's called JSafe. So essentially what JSafe does is it's an app where you can log in. You can remain anonymous as well. And no one sees your information unless you want them to. And what you can essentially do is if you are facing online trolling or physical attacks while you're covering a protest or something, you can report that through the app. And the app provides you resources. You can report the case and find other people who can help you while you're going through something as well. So it's essentially an app that can be used to report a case, to find resources and find, request a support network or other forms of support that you need, and depending on the incident. It's for everything. So whether you're on the field or you're online, you can share screenshots of an incident. You can report something confidential that will remain confidential because it only goes into one area which our safety team looks into. All right, so, and then I think I will go a little bit into one of the other issues that I think a lot of journalists in the United States are facing these days, and that is covering protests, which is something that is where we find a lot of violations taking place. We found women journalists to be physically harassed. We have found other police violence against women journalists while they're covering protests or demonstrations. So obviously one of the no-brainers is to prepare yourself when you're going in to cover a demonstration. But how do you prepare yourself? It's important to remember that, of course, you have your permits, you have your driver license, you have your equipments when you're going in, but also to, before you're going in, to prepare yourself to understand what the environment will be like. As you know that during protests and demonstrations, the police departments and other authorities prepare themselves as well, right? So they prepare themselves with equipping themselves with tear gas and other things to de-escalate a protest, right? Or whatever, to also just to not let people protest to begin with. So to have the knowledge of what the protest is going to be like, or what that demonstration is going to be like, to be in touch with community members, if you can, be in touch with the police department and get some information, call them up and ask them what they are preparing to do. In that way, you're also, letting them know that you will be there as press. So you're giving them, a lot of the police violence that happens is, we have noticed and documented that police would look at journalist IDs and they would deliberately target them. So if you are able to, let them know ahead of time, you're basically creating ground. I also want to say that this is especially important because we have seen that in the last 1.5 years, there have been cases of police violence against journalists where they look at the ID and then they arrest, etc. And some of them have led to court cases. And so if you are in touch with the police ahead of time, you are already developing your track record. That can come in handy in a lot of ways. Obviously, you are going as press and you have permits. So when you do have permit, you are not hiding from the police. So it's better if you let them know ahead of time as well, so that they have less reason to attack you later on, if you're spotted. And then obviously, be in touch with community members, have colleagues with you, go in groups of 2 or 3, but not more. Especially for photojournalists, it's important that you are alongside at least 2 other colleagues, but not crowded in one place. Your positioning really matters. So where you are, obviously social distancing, but also being in a position where you can quickly get away. There are some of the guidelines that we have as well for covering protests, and I'll be happy to share that later on a PDF. So positioning is really important. Make sure that you, alongside your colleagues, have your emergency contacts, you have your own emergency contacts as well as a few of your colleagues, so that and then you can share yours with them, so that if something happens, if you're not to be seen for a while, that it is reported, or if your colleagues are not to be seen for a while, that it is reported as well. So sharing emergency contacts of each other is very important. One of the things that is also very important, that is clothing. This is something that, especially when we are talking about protests and demonstrations for foreign correspondents, they have to clothe themselves according to the culture, and make sure, especially women journalists, have to make sure that their attire is appropriate generally when you're reporting. But clothing is also one of it is also important for your safety. So do neutral clothing that doesn't look like you're a protester. Do not wear black. Do not have a lot of things that are tied around, so they cannot be pulled. Those kind of things. To remove any kind of interruptions or obstructions that can become problematic while you're in a precarious situation covering the protest, focusing on your reporting. Especially if you're a photojournalist, you already have a lot of equipment, so make sure you don't have a lot of wires and that kind of stuff. Just make sure, but then if you're wearing glasses, goggles, you make sure that they're connected, or your camera that you have. So calculate where you can have straps and where not. Tear gas and pepper spray is something that is used, often in demonstrations by police. That is something that there's always sometimes we know what to take for that kind of situation, and sometimes people do all kinds of things that sometimes can be difficult or not useful. So obviously take a bottle of water, saline, to flush your eyes of tear gas and pepper spray, and make sure that you rinse your eyes immediately if you are pepper sprayed. Do not waste Vaseline, skin creams, makeup, and suntan lotions on your skin, as tear gas or pepper spray can adhere to it. Anything that is sticky, the tear gas or pepper spray can stick and cause more irritation. Just make sure that you have your gear, correctly, and then, take your food, have some supplies to eat, because sometimes demonstrations can be long, so you want to be prepared for a longer haul. If you are dealing with hostile law enforcement, certainly do not argue with them. If someone else is getting arrested, and you argue, you're likely to get arrested as well, and you don't want to end up there. So, maintain your distance if you do come into contact with them, and if you are being targeted, or if they're they're targeting you, then you show your press pass and make sure that they're aware that you're a journalist. And this doesn't mean that just because they are aware that you're a journalist, they won't arrest you. They are likely to arrest you then too, but you have to take precautions from your end. And if you're being taken away, scream and call out for help, and ask people to report that you're being taken away. You can call out your name if your colleagues are around, or someone who knows you, or even if it's just people as part of the protest. And then obviously the final thing is to make sure that you have your digital safety in place. So use encrypted two-step verification and hard to crack passwords on for your online presence and online accounts, and then also remove personal information from your social media posts. Sometimes it would also be important to remove your location from your social media posts, depending on where you are and what the situation is, if that is needed. And then also, if you're carrying hard drives, make sure that you have passwords on there.
Thank you, Karen. And for everyone that's joining us today, we'll be posting a recording of this video along with additional materials, links to numerous other resources, and other tools that all of you can use in your work. So with that, I want to thank you again, Karen, for all of this incredibly helpful and valuable information. And thank you all for joining us today. Again, you can find the recordings of all of these classes, including the one today, at nfac.org. And as always, if you found today's class to be helpful, please consider supporting this 30-minute skills program by becoming a NEFAC member at nfac.org/join. I want to thank you all again, and we'll see you next month.